The new Batman cartoon, Batman Caped Crusader, has something of a reputation for being a dark, gritty interpretation of Batman. While it is true that Batman the Animated Series, arguably the best version of Batman, could also be dark and disturbing, it was peppered with moments of humour. The villains of BTAS famously took inspiration from the comic book source material, keeping all the things that worked, dropping everything that didn't, and brought about some fairly drastic changes. See their versions of Two-Face, Mr. Freeze and Clayface for examples of this. I've done a whole bunch of essays about these characters, so you are spoiled for choice if you want to learn more. Caped Crusader's villains, meanwhile, are generally more grounded than their BTAS counterparts. For instance, their version of Catwoman has gone back to the golden age of Batman stories in the 1940s, and is a very faithful adaptation of the spirit of that early version of the character. This Catwoman is an unrepentant thief, someone that enjoys the deception of the costumed life, and sneaking around helping herself to other people's belongings, and sometimes their pets. BTAS's version of Catwoman started out as an animal rights activist, and she used the proceeds of her crimes to fund wildlife sanctuaries for endangered animals. She had a noble purpose, or at least that's what she told herself. The original comic book version of Catwoman was a thief that wore disguises. In her first appearance, she disguised herself as an elderly woman, briefly moved on to a proto-fursona cat mask, before settling on the purple and green outfit. Back in the 40s, most comic book characters were fairly one-dimensional, and this was true of Catwoman. She had no motivation other than wanting to be wealthy, which is actually quite a relatable reason now that I say it out loud. Who doesn't want to have loads of money? And sometimes she just wanted to seduce Batman. Caped Crusader's Catwoman is more of a halfway house between the comic book original and the BTAS Catwoman. She has no noble motives, the only thing she's interested in is saving herself. When we meet Selina Kyle, she's admiring the Wayne family jewellery collection at Gotham Museum. Bruce Wayne playfully notes that he is aware that things tend to go missing around her, indicating that Selina Kyle has a reputation for absconding with precious items. Selina makes light of her reputation, stating that pretty things sometimes have a habit of coming home with her, which also works as a pickup line for Bruce, although he's having none of it. Speaking of home, Selina Kyle's family are down on their luck. Well, I say family, really it's just her. She describes herself as an orphan to make a connection to Bruce, but he is well aware that her father is still alive. He's in prison for tax fraud, and it has ruined her formerly well-to-do family. The episode neatly juxtaposes Bruce and Selina by cutting to the night the Waynes were murdered, showing the deeply traumatized Bruce and how he became Batman that very night. It really emphasises how full of crap Selina is, and how she just casually throws around a very serious term like orphan, with no consideration for the pain others that are actually orphans might feel. Selina has no idea what it truly means to be an orphan, and I think her remarks anger Batman, although he does a good job of hiding it, at least until a journalist makes a remark about wearing pearls in the East End being a very foolish thing to do, and Batman punches him out. I can't help but feel that some of that anger was built up by Selina. There's no mention of her mother, but I think it's safe to assume that she is deceased because she isn't seen in the show. The closest thing Selina has to her mother is her housemaid Greta, who dutifully runs around behind her cleaning up her mess and disposing of past due bills. While the Kyle family had no money, they are asset rich. Selina seems to take Greta for granted and ignores her not too subtle hints that she expects to be paid for her labour. Apparently it's been 3 years since Greta was last paid, which really shows how patient she is. Instead, Selina treats Greta the same way she does any other creditor. She ignores her and hopes she'll stop asking. That's not to say that Selina is entirely self-centered. She shows affection towards cats and has amassed a collection of dozens of them. Each cat that appears in the show is based on the crew's real-life pets, including this black and white cat based on the Tim family pet, Miss Kitty. And she shows them far more care and attention than any human being. Selina Kyle is carefree and frankly in denial about her precarious position in life. It's a hopeful, deliberate ignorance that comes from extreme wealth. She's fortunate in that she comes from a wealthy family, so the establishment is willing to give her multiple chances. Anyone else would have debt collectors kicking in the doors and seizing assets. Of course, just because she's carefree, that doesn't mean she isn't aware of the problematic situation she's in. But rather than taking more practical measures, such as selling off property and assets and reducing her outgoings, she takes inspiration from the Batman and comes up with a costumed identity of her own. Unlike the Batman, Catwoman doesn't plan on doing good deeds. Instead, she uses the mask to hide her identity while she robs businesses blind. One of my favourite things about this episode is the montage of newspaper headlines detailing her crimes. Daring robbery at Midtown Exchange. Tiger eye brooch among missing items. 5 jewellery heists in 3 days. Cat burglar strikes again. Guard says thief smelled nice. my personal favourite. Catwoman may be able to outfox the police, and we see a brief look at her sadistic side as she slashes Detective Bullock's face with her claws, but she is no match for Batman, who dispatches her pretty easily. For Selina, being Catwoman is a way of entertaining herself, to show off what she's capable of, all under the mask of anonymity. However, that mask is quickly pulled off when Bullock and Flass pick her up. As Selina Kyle is no common street thief from the wrong side of the tracks, she can rely on her privileged upbringing to get herself a sweet deal from the district attorney, Harvey Dent, on the condition that she never does it again. An unintended consequence of this is that it makes Bullock and Flass look like incompetent losers. They caught her red-handed and she still got off, as their colleagues in the GCPD take great pleasure in reminding them of. While this humiliates the two detectives, they know how Gotham works and plot to murder her. They know that they'll be able to get away with it, likely because they've done it multiple times before. And they will do it again. Bullock and Flass aren't the only ones frustrated with Catwoman's near miss. In early press releases for the show, Bruce Timm and James Tucker talked about how Batman becomes obsessed with Catwoman and wants to put her behind bars so that he can get her out of his head and resume his real mission. But I didn't really get a sense that Batman was all that interested in her sexually. I felt like Catwoman annoyed him more than anything. Or at least the fact that she was able to evade justice by turning on the waterworks for the judge and Harvey Dent frustrated him. When Catwoman tumbles over the edge of a building, Batman dives over the edge and grabs her, saving her life. She responds by kissing him, and he hesitates for a moment before telling her to get off him. Maybe that's the scene that they were alluding to, but then he remembered who she was. One of the only women in town that Bruce Wayne hasn't taken on a date, and has no intention of doing so. Now, the argument that Selina Kyle made in court is that no one saw her steal the jewels. She just happened to be there at the time they were stolen, wearing a costume. Maybe Batman did it. It's a flimsy argument, but it's enough to sway Dent and the judge. So Batman decides that there needs to be irrefutable evidence to ensure a conviction. Enter E.L. O'Brien, a slimy photographer who, in the comics, becomes Plastic Man. But in this show, he's just a regular guy trying to make a buck. We first see him taking pictures at the museum for the newspapers, handing out his details to the audience, offering to sell them copies of their pictures after they see them published. I found it amusing that Batman's attempt at asking for help closely mirrors an interrogation, with him holding O'Brien near the edge. Yes, O'Brien slipped and Batman caught him, but he didn't have to continue dangling him over the edge. It's another example of this Batman's inability to have normal conversations with people. O'Brien documents the crime a little too well, in that he also takes pictures of Batman beating down Bullock and Flass after they attempted to shoot Catwoman while she was down. The problem with the still images is that they don't really capture Flass's murderous intent before Batman knocked him out. So to the casual observer, it looks like Batman beat up some cops and then handcuffed Catwoman to a table. As this is a pre-digital era, the incriminating pictures of Catwoman can only be published if O'Brien develops the entire film, which will show Batman assaulting the two detectives. Batman ultimately thinks that putting Catwoman behind bars is worth the cost, and doesn't really care about the damage those pictures will do to his reputation. This leads to the creation of the anti-Batman police strike team, which will cause all sorts of headaches later on. With Catwoman caught with definitive proof that she was the perpetrator, Selina Kyle winds up going to prison, although that's because she can't afford bail money. Greta had sold all of Selina's belongings and claimed it as 3 years of back pay, and was treating herself to a nice cruise. It's kind of ironic that Catwoman's downfall would come as a result of someone stealing from her. All in all, this Catwoman is probably the least psychologically interesting of the new villains in Caped Crusader, but tonally, she's very different. Where villains like the Penguin and Gentleman Ghost are cruel and callous, and Clayface and Two-Face are genuinely unhinged, Catwoman puts on a costume to commit robberies because it's fun. Everything is a game to her. She takes inspiration from Batman, whether it be the costume, the similar name, or the fact that she gets her own Catmobile complete with cat eyes and an engine that literally purrs. She very clearly admires Batman, but he obviously doesn't feel the same way about her. I suppose it's ironic that she became Catwoman as a way of getting funds to maintain the lifestyle to which she was accustomed to, but it was her costumed activities that ultimately cost her her possessions and her liberty. I'm very interested in seeing what's next for Selina Kyle, especially now that she has no money at all and her family name is completely in the gutter. Sure, her father was a convicted criminal, but it was a white-collar crime that most wealthy elites were at least partially guilty of, I'm sure. Selina, meanwhile, stole from the wealthy, and even a place as corrupt as Gotham City would not tolerate that. Okay, that's it for this video essay. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd like to hear more about Batman Caped Crusader, why not check out our podcast Totally Schway Flip Side, where my wife and I have gone through all 10 episodes. This is a spoiler-filled conversation about each episode in sequential order, so only check this out if you've watched the show or if you have no intentions of ever watching it yourself. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month, which will grant you early access to my video essays, and some supplementary perks like custom emojis, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, and community posts. And special thanks to my current channel members, who are all listed on the screen right now. Next time I'll be talking about the 4th episode, The Night of the Hunters, and how Firebug may very well be the costumed villain of the episode, but the real villains are detectives Bullock and Flass. Hope to see you then.